David Hale never imagined that stepping into a dark alley on a rain-soaked Tuesday night would cost him everything and give him everything. One moment he was walking home from another grueling shift, worried about rent and his 7-year-old son's next meal. The next, he was bleeding on wet concrete, having taken a knife to the ribs defending a stranger. That stranger turned out to be Cassandra Ward, one of America's most powerful billionaires. 24 hours later, she would offer him a deal that would change both their lives forever. But before we dive into this incredible journey, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. The alarm clock screamed at 4 a.m., same as it had every weekday for the past 3 years. David Hale rolled out of his narrow bed with the practiced silence of a man who'd learned that even the smallest sound could wake a 7-year-old whose sleep was more precious than gold. The cramped apartment felt like a shoebox in the pre-dawn darkness, every shadow a reminder of dreams that had died with his wife. He padded to the kitchen in his socks, careful to avoid the loose floorboard near Leo's bedroom door. The coffee maker, a $10 garage sale that wheezed like an old man with emphysema, gurgled to life. While it worked its magic, David opened the refrigerator and surveyed their kingdom. 2 eggs, a half-empty gallon of milk that would expire tomorrow, and a loaf of bread that had seen better days. "It'll do," he whispered to himself, the same mantra that had gotten him through 1,000 mornings just like this one. The broken action figure sat on the counter where Leo had left it the night before, its plastic arm hanging by a thin wire. Captain Thunder, Leo called it. David had promised to fix it, but superglue cost money they didn't have, and time was a luxury reserved for people who didn't work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. "Morning, Superman," David whispered as he gently shook Leo awake at 5:30. The boy's eyes opened slowly, filled with that special kind of trust that children reserve for the people who make their world safe. "Is it school time already, Dad?" "Not yet, buddy. Daddy's got to work early today. Mrs. Patterson will walk you to school, remember?" Leo nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who'd grown up too fast. At 7, he could make his own breakfast, tie his own shoes, and explain to his friends why they couldn't afford the latest toys that everyone else seemed to have. It was a maturity that both broke David's heart and filled him with fierce pride. They sat together at the small kitchen table, sharing scrambled eggs and toast while the morning news played on their ancient television. The anchor was talking about some corporate merger worth billions a world that might as well have existed on Mars for all the relevance it had to their daily struggle. "Dad." Leo's voice was tentative the way it always was when he wanted something he knew they couldn't afford. "What's up, buddy?" "Tommy's dad is taking him to see that new superhero movie this weekend, the one with all the explosions." David's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. He knew what was coming, had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times. "That sounds awesome. Could we maybe go too?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with everything David couldn't provide. Movie tickets, popcorn soda, the simple joy of an afternoon spent watching heroes save the world. For other families, it was nothing. For them, it might as well have been a trip to the moon. "We'll see," David said, gently, hating himself for the answer that they both knew meant no. "Maybe we can rent something this weekend, make our own popcorn, have a movie marathon." Leo's face lit up with forced enthusiasm. "Yeah, that sounds even better. We can pause it whenever we want and talk about the good parts." The resilience in his son's voice was a knife to David's chest. 7 years old, and Leo had already mastered the art of finding silver linings in disappointment. It was a skill no child should need. As they finished breakfast, David's mind drifted to Sarah, as it always did during these quiet moments. His wife had been gone for 3 years now, taken by a cancer that fought harder than their insurance coverage. The medical bills had consumed their savings, forced them out of their small house, and turned David from a steady construction foreman into a man who cleaned office buildings in the dead of night. Sarah would have known what to say about the movie. She would have found a way to make their living room feel like a palace, their microwave popcorn taste like a feast. David did his best, but there were moments when he felt like he was drowning, trying to be both mother and father to a boy who deserved so much more. "Better get moving." David said, checking his phone. "Mrs. Patterson will be here soon." Leo gave him a hug that nearly knocked him over, all fierce love and sticky fingers from the orange juice. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Superman. Be good at school." David grabbed his work jacket and stepped out into the gray morning. The construction job he'd lost after Sarah's death had paid better, but the hours had been unpredictable. Night cleaning at Meridian Tower paid less, but it was steady, reliable, and most importantly, it meant he could be home when Leo needed him. The bus ride across town gave David time to think. Other passengers clutched coffee cups and stared at phones, most dressed for office jobs that paid more in a month than David made in 3. He didn't resent them much, but sometimes he wondered what choices or accidents of birth had put them in those seats while he headed to clean up after them. Meridian Tower stretched 35 floors into the Seattle sky, all glass and steel, and the kind of modern architecture that made statements about power and success. David badged in through the service entrance, nodding to Jerry, the security guard who'd been working nights longer than anyone could remember. "Morning, Dave. How's the boy?" "Good, really good. Growing too fast." "They all do. My grandson's taller than me now, and I swear he was knee-high just last week." David's section covered floors 20 through 25 executive offices where decisions worth millions got made during daylight hours. He moved through the spaces with efficient precision, emptying trash bins, vacuuming carpets, wiping down surfaces that would gleam again by the time their occupants arrived. Sometimes he paused at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over a city that sprawled to the horizon. Up here, surrounded by the trappings of success, it was easy to imagine a different life. One where $14 movie tickets weren't budget killers. But David had learned the difference between wanting something and being able to have it. He focused on the work, taking pride in doing it well, even if no one noticed. Every surface he cleaned was a step toward keeping Leo's world stable. His supervisor, Marcus Chen, found him around noon. Marcus was decent understanding about David's situation, flexible when Leo got sick or school called. "Dave, got a minute?" Something in Marcus's tone made David's stomach tighten. "Sure. What's up?" "Building management's been looking at numbers. Overtime costs are getting scrutinized." The words hit David like a physical blow. Overtime was what made their budget work the difference between scraping by and falling behind. "I understand. I'll be more efficient." "You're one of my best, Dave. Don't change how you work. Just be visible. You know. Make sure they see your value." After Marcus left, David continued his rounds with renewed focus, though his mind raced with calculations. Without overtime, they'd be short on rent. He could look for a second job, but that meant less time with Leo. The eternal choice between financial stability and being present as a father. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows when David finally headed home. The bus ride felt longer than usual, his body tired from the physical work and his mind heavy with worry. He'd learned to compartmentalize to focus on immediate needs, rather than the bigger questions that had no easy answers. Leo was waiting when he got home, homework spread across their small kitchen table under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye. The elderly neighbor had been a godsend since Sarah's death, stepping in without being asked and refusing David's attempts to pay her. "How was school, buddy?" "Good. We learned about space today. Did you know there's a planet made entirely of diamonds?" David smiled at his son's enthusiasm. Whatever challenges they faced, Leo's curiosity remained intact. "I did not know that. That's incredible." They worked through math problems together, David pushing aside his worries about overtime and budgets. This was what mattered, these moments of connection. The quiet pride he felt watching Leo tackle problems with determination inherited from both his parents. Later, as Leo played quietly in his room and David prepared their simple dinner, he thought about the choices that had brought them here. He could have taken his sister's offer to move back to Ohio after Sarah's death, where family could help with Leo. But this city was where Sarah was buried, where their memories lived, where Leo's friends and school provided stability. Some nights, David wondered if he was being selfish, keeping his son in circumstances that were harder than necessary. But then, Leo would laugh at something on TV, or show off a drawing from school, or fall asleep curled against David's side during their weekend movie nights, and David knew they were exactly where they belonged. The broken action figure still sat on the counter, its empty eye sockets seeming to watch David move around the kitchen. Tomorrow, he decided he'd find time to fix it properly. There had to be a way to make things work. David Hale had no idea that in just a few hours, one moment of instinctive courage would change everything about their carefully constructed life. The rain started falling just as David's shift ended at midnight, a steady drizzle that turned the city streets slick and reflective under the streetlights. He pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped out of Meridian Tower, waving goodbye to Jerry, who was settling in for another long night. David's body ached in familiar ways, his lower back protesting the constant bending his knees, reminding him he wasn't 25 anymore. The double shift he'd pulled to make up for potential lost overtime had stretched his usual 6 hours into a punishing 10-hour marathon. But the extra money would help cover Leo's upcoming field trip to the Science Museum. The bus stop was 4 blocks away, a walk David had made hundreds of times through neighborhoods that ranged from business district clean to quietly desperate. Tonight, the rain made everything look different, washing the harsh edges off the urban landscape and turning neon signs into watercolor smears. As David walked, his mind wandered to tomorrow's schedule. Leo had a dentist appointment after school, just a cleaning, but one that would require David to leave work early and lose those precious overtime hours. The math was always tight, a constant balancing act between being the father Leo needed and earning enough to keep their small world stable. The sound reached him first, a woman's voice, sharp with fear, cutting through the steady patter of rain on pavement. David's steps slowed automatically, his senses sharpening. 3 years of night shifts had taught him to be aware of his surroundings, to recognize when something was wrong. "Please, just take my purse," the voice said, closer now. "I don't want any trouble." David rounded the corner and saw them in the mouth of an alley between 2 office buildings. A woman in an expensive-looking coat backed against a brick wall facing 2 men who moved with predatory confidence. Even in the dim light from a distant street lamp, David could see her fear, the way she held herself as if trying to disappear. For a split second, David hesitated. This wasn't his neighborhood, wasn't his problem. He had a son at home who needed him a job he couldn't afford to lose. The smart move would be to call 911 and keep walking. But the woman looked up then, and David saw her face clearly. She was older than he'd initially thought, maybe 40, with dark hair damp from rain and eyes that held intelligence alongside terror. There was something in her expression, not just fear, but desperate courage, as if she was trying to talk her way out of a situation that had already moved beyond words. One of the attackers stepped closer, and David saw the glint of metal, a knife held low, but visible, transforming this from simple robbery into something potentially deadly. David's body moved before his mind finished processing. 3 years of grief and struggle of watching his son grow up too fast and accept too little crystallized into a moment of pure protective instinct. He'd been helpless to save Sarah from cancer, powerless to shield Leo from harsh realities. But here was someone he could help. "Hey!" David's voice carried authority earned from years supervising construction crews. "Leave her alone." The 2 men turned toward him, surprise quickly shifting to calculation. David was bigger than either individually, but they had weapons and numbers. He could see them weighing options, fight or flight. "Walk away, hero," the one with the knife said. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does." David stepped closer, hands empty but ready. Years of physical labor had kept him strong despite loss and struggle. "The lady asked you to leave. I think you should listen." The woman's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "No, please," she said, and David couldn't tell if she was talking to him or her attackers. "Just go. Both of you, please just go." But it was too late for walking away. The second man, older and more cautious than his partner, had already decided to fight. He lunged forward with surprising speed, forcing David to react instinctively. Muscle memory from construction site scuffles kicked in. David sidestepped the attack while grabbing for the man's wrist. They went down together on wet pavement, David's size advantage offset by desperation and slick concrete. David heard the woman gasp, heard running footsteps that might have been the other attacker fleeing or approaching. No time to look. The man beneath him was stronger than expected, wiry and quick with lean muscle that spoke of a hard life. They rolled across the alley, David trying to control the man's hands while avoiding wild swings at his head. David managed to pin his opponent's knife hand against concrete, but victory was short-lived. Pain exploded along his ribs as the second attacker's blade found its mark sliding between jacket and shirt to bite deep. The shock made David gasp, his grip loosening just enough for the first man to break free. "David!" The woman's voice was sharp with alarm, and somewhere in his fading consciousness David wondered how she knew his name. But the thought dissolved in the immediate reality of trying to stay upright as warmth soaked through his shirt. Sirens cut through the night air, still distant but approaching. The two attackers exchanged glances, some wordless communication, and then they were gone, disappearing into the maze of alleys that honeycombed this part of the city. David sat up slowly, one hand pressed against his wounded side. The pain was sharp but manageable. He'd had worse injuries on job sites, though none that bled quite this freely. His jacket was ruined, and he could feel sticky warmth spreading across his shirt. "Oh, God, you're hurt." The woman knelt beside him on wet pavement, her expensive coat forgotten. "We need to get you to a hospital." "I'm okay," David said automatically, the response of someone who'd learned that admitting weakness was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Just a scratch." But even as he said it, David could feel his strength ebbing, adrenaline leaving him shaky and nauseous. The woman's face was coming in and out of focus, features blurring in ways that suggested this was more than just a scratch. "Stay with me," she said, her voice taking on natural command. "The ambulance is almost here. You're going to be fine." David tried to focus on her face to ground himself while the world tilted. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the manufactured way of magazines, but with mature elegance refined by experience and intelligence. Laugh lines spoke of someone who'd made difficult decisions and found reasons to smile anyway. "What's your name?" she asked, her hand warm against his forehead. "David," he managed. "David Hale." "I'm Cassandra," she said, and something in her tone suggested this was significant. Cassandra Ward. The name meant nothing to David in his current state, though later he would recognize it as belonging to one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. Right now, she was simply the woman he'd tried to help kneeling beside him, while his blood mixed with rainwater on concrete. Paramedics arrived in a rush of efficiency and bright lights. How was he feeling? Did he know where he was? Could he tell them what happened? David answered as best he could, but his attention kept drifting to Cassandra, who stood back to give the medical team room but never took her eyes off him. There was something in her expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but also puzzled interest, as if he'd done something that didn't fit her understanding of how the world worked. As they loaded him onto a stretcher, David's last clear thought was of Leo sleeping safely in their small apartment, with no idea that his father's life had just taken a dramatic turn. Mrs. Patterson would find his note in the morning, would take care of getting Leo to school. But David would have explaining to do when he got home, if he got home. The thought slipped through his defenses as consciousness began to fade, leaving him with the image of Cassandra Ward's face and the strange certainty that nothing would ever be quite the same again. David's eyes opened to antiseptic smells and the steady beep of monitors. White acoustic ceiling tiles came into focus, water-stained in one corner, and for a moment he couldn't remember how he'd gotten here. Then he tried to sit up, and sharp pain in his ribs brought everything flooding back Rain Alley. The woman with frightened eyes. "Dad?" Leo's voice was small and worried, coming from somewhere to David's left. "Are you awake?" David turned his head carefully, every movement sending fresh discomfort through his bandaged torso. Leo sat in a plastic chair too big for him, legs swinging nervously. Mrs. Patterson stood behind him, weathered face creased with concern. "Hey, Superman!" David managed, voice rougher than expected. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at school?" "Mrs. Patterson got a call from the hospital," Leo said, climbing carefully onto the bed's edge. "They said you were hurt. Are you okay? Are you going to die like Mom did?" The last question hit harder than the knife wound. David reached out with his good arm and pulled Leo close, feeling his son's small body trembling. "No, buddy. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. It's just a cut and the doctor's fixed me up good as new." Over Leo's head, David met Mrs. Patterson's eyes and saw his own worry reflected there. She'd been through this before. With them, it helped hold their small family together when Sarah's illness consumed everything else. The unspoken question hung between them. What would happen to Leo if something happened to David? "The doctors say you need rest," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "Leo can stay home today, help take care of you when you're discharged." David tried to process the timeline. "How long have I been here?" "Since last night. It's almost noon now. The police want to talk to you when you're feeling up to it." David's mind immediately jumped to practical concerns. He'd missed half a shift, maybe more. Marcus would need to know what happened, would need coverage if David couldn't work. Hospital bills would be substantial. Even with basic insurance, there'd be copays and deductibles they couldn't afford. A soft knock interrupted his spiral of worry. A woman in scrubs entered, followed by someone David didn't recognize. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked uncomfortable in the hospital environment. "Mr. Hale," the nurse checked his chart. "I'm Jennifer, your day nurse. This gentleman is from billing. He wanted to discuss payment options." David's stomach clenched. He'd been through this during Sarah's illness, careful conversations about payment plans and financial hardship programs. The shame never got easier. "Mr. Hale," the billing representative said, consulting his tablet. "Your emergency surgery and overnight stay total approximately $15,000. With insurance covering 70% your responsibility is around $4,500. We do offer payment plans." $4,500. David felt the number like a physical blow. That was 3 months of rent money they simply didn't have. "I'll need to see the paperwork, understand exactly." Another knock interrupted this, one more confident. The door opened to reveal a woman David recognized but couldn't quite place. Elegant, composed, carrying flowers that probably cost more than David made in a week. "I'm sorry," she said, noting the crowded room. "I can come back when you're not busy." "Cassandra," David said, the name surfacing from foggy memories. "You're Cassandra Ward." The billing representative's eyes widened at the name, and David caught the subtle shift from bureaucratic efficiency to something approaching deference. Clearly, Cassandra Ward commanded respect in this hospital, perhaps this entire city. "Mr. Hale," she said, stepping into the room with quiet authority. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got stabbed," David said, then immediately regretted the flippancy. This woman had been through trauma too, had probably spent the night reliving those terrifying moments. "I'm sorry, I'm fine. How are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm perfectly fine, thanks to you." Cassandra's gaze shifted to Leo, who was studying her with frank childhood curiosity. "And this must be your son." "Leo," David said. "This is Ms. Ward. She's the lady I helped last night." Leo studied Cassandra solemnly. "Are you a princess? You look like a princess." Cassandra's serious expression softened into genuine warmth. "I'm not a princess, but thank you for the compliment. Your father is a very brave man." "I know," Leo said with simple pride. "He's the bravest person in the whole world." David felt his chest tighten with emotion. The billing representative cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to leave with Cassandra Ward present. "Miss Ward," the man said carefully, "I was discussing payment options with Mr. Hale for his medical expenses." "Actually," Cassandra said, her tone becoming businesslike, "I'd like to cover Mr. Hale's entire bill. He was injured helping me. It's the least I can do." David's face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been anger. "No, absolutely not." Cassandra looked surprised, as if she wasn't accustomed to being refused. "Mr. Hale, you were hurt because of me. It's only fair." "It's not fair. It's charity," David said more sharply than intended. Leo looked between them with confusion, picking up on tension but not understanding its source. "I made my choice. I don't need your money." The billing representative looked like he wanted to disappear. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward diplomatically. "Perhaps we should let Mr. Hale rest. Payment discussions can wait." "Of course," Cassandra said, though David could see she was taken aback by his rejection. "I should let you recover. I just wanted to make sure you were all right and to thank you properly." She placed the flower arrangement on the nightstand, blooms filling the sterile room with unexpected color and fragrance. For a moment, David felt bad about his harsh response. She was only trying to help, to show gratitude in ways that probably made sense in her world. "Miss Ward," he said as she moved toward the door, "I'm glad you're safe. That's all the thanks I need." She paused, studying his face with intensity that made David uncomfortable. "May I ask you something, Mr. Hale?" "Sure. Why did you help me? You didn't know who I was. Couldn't have known if I was worth the risk. Why?" David considered the question, aware that Leo was listening, that Mrs. Patterson was watching, that his answer mattered more than he fully understood. Because it was the right thing to do. Because if someone didn't help you and something bad happened, I'd have to live with that. Cassandra nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she'd suspected. "My card," she said, placing expensive paper on the nightstand beside the flowers, "in case you change your mind about anything." After she left, the billing representative finished his spiel with considerably less enthusiasm. David agreed to monthly payments that would stretch their budget to breaking signed papers that made their financial situation officially precarious, and tried not to think about the elegant simplicity of Cassandra Ward's offer. "Dad," Leo asked when they were alone, except for Mrs. Patterson, "why didn't you let the pretty lady pay for the hospital?" David pulled his son closer, breathing in familiar scents of shampoo and crayons that always seemed to cling to Leo's clothes. "Because when someone gives you something for nothing, they usually expect something back, and we don't have anything to give." It was a lesson David had learned through 3 years of well-meaning offers and charity that came with strings attached. Better to struggle with dignity than accept help that would cost more than money in the end. But as he drifted off to sleep that afternoon, pain medication making his thoughts fuzzy, David found himself thinking about Cassandra Ward's business card and wondering if pride was a luxury he could really afford. The apartment felt smaller when David returned home 2 days later, as if the hospital stay had somehow shifted his perspective on the familiar space. Every step sent a dull ache through his bandaged ribs, and the simple act of climbing the stairs to their second-floor unit left him winded and frustrated with his own weakness. Leo hovered nearby, his 7-year-old instincts telling him his father needed help, but unsure what he could actually do. He'd arranged his homework neatly on the kitchen table and had even attempted to make dinner, a bowl of cereal and a peanut butter sandwich that sat waiting with the earnest pride of a child trying to care for his parent. "Thank you, Superman," David said, settling carefully into his chair. "This looks perfect." Mrs. Patterson had left a casserole in the refrigerator with reheating instructions written in her careful handwriting. But David was touched by Leo's effort. They ate together in comfortable silence, the normal rhythm of their evening routine, providing an anchor of normalcy after the chaos of the past few days. It wasn't until Leo was safely asleep that David allowed himself to fully confront their situation. He spread the hospital paperwork across the kitchen table, Cassandra Ward's business card sitting prominently among the bills like an elegant white flag of surrender. The payment plan he'd agreed to would add another $300 to their monthly expenses, money they simply didn't have. Even with his overtime hours, their budget had been stretched thin. Without them, which seemed likely given his injury and time away from work, they'd be short on rent within a month. David's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hope you're feeling better. Take the time you need to heal. We'll figure out the schedule when you're ready to come back." The kindness in the message only made David feel worse. Marcus was a good supervisor, but he couldn't hold David's position indefinitely. If David couldn't perform the physical demands of the job, and with a fresh stab wound in his ribs, he wasn't sure when he'd be able to lift heavy equipment or spend 8 hours bending and reaching what then. A knock at the door interrupted his spiral of worry. David glanced at the clock, nearly 10 p.m. too late for Mrs. Patterson or any of their neighbors. He moved carefully to the window and peered through the blinds, surprised to see a man in an expensive suit standing on their small porch. "Mr. Hale." The man's voice was polite but authoritative when David opened the door. I'm Robert Harrison from Harrison Investigations. I wonder if I might have a word with you. David's guard went up immediately. In his experience, people in expensive suits who showed up at his door after dark rarely brought good news. About what? It's regarding the incident 3 nights ago. I'm working on behalf of Ms. Ward to ensure all the facts are properly documented. David considered refusing. He'd already given his statement to the police and answered their questions as thoroughly as he could, but something in the man's manner suggested this wasn't a request he could easily dismiss. Ms. Ward hired you? David asked, stepping back to let the investigator inside. Ms. Ward is a prominent public figure, Harrison explained, settling into David's worn armchair with the careful posture of someone accustomed to nicer furniture. When she's involved in any kind of incident, it's important to have all the details properly investigated. David sat across from him, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. I told the police everything I remember. I'm sure you did. This is just a precaution. Harrison consulted a small notebook. You work at Meridian Tower, is that correct, night shift custodian? That's right. Single father, 1 child age 7. Lost your wife 3 years ago to cancer. The casual recitation of his personal tragedy made David's jaw tighten. What does any of that have to do with what happened in the alley? Context, Harrison said smoothly. It helps to understand the full picture. You were walking home from work when you encountered the situation. David answered the questions mechanically, increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Harrison seemed less interested in the details of the attack than in David's background, his financial situation, his relationship with his son. Have you had any contact with Ms. Ward since the incident? Harrison asked. She visited me in the hospital, brought flowers. Did she offer you anything? Money, perhaps? David hesitated. Something about the question felt like a trap, though he couldn't figure out what kind. She offered to pay my medical bills. I refused. Harrison made a note. That must have been difficult. A man in your situation with mounting expenses and a child to support. What exactly are you suggesting? David's voice carried a warning edge. Nothing at all. I'm simply gathering information. Harrison closed his notebook and stood. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hale. Miss Ward values what you did for her, and she wants to make sure all aspects of the incident are properly understood. After the investigator left, David sat in his living room feeling violated and confused. The man's questions had made him feel like a suspect rather than a victim, as if his act of courage was somehow suspicious because of his circumstances. Meanwhile, across the city in her penthouse office, Cassandra Ward was conducting her own research into David Hale. Unlike her investigator's formal approach, Cassandra had turned to the internet searching for any trace of the man who had risked his life for a stranger. What she found painted a picture that both impressed and saddened her. David Hale had been a construction foreman before his wife's illness, had owned a small house in a decent neighborhood, had been building what looked like a solid, middle-class life. The medical bills from Sarah's cancer treatment had consumed their savings, forced them to sell their home, pushed David into lower-paying work with more reliable hours. There were no criminal records, no history of violence or substance abuse. His neighbors spoke well of him in the few online community forum posts she could find. His son's school had him listed as an involved parent attending conferences and school events despite his work schedule. The picture that emerged was of a man doing his best under impossible circumstances, maintaining his dignity and his son's well-being through sheer determination. It was a story Cassandra recognized from her company's charitable giving, the working poor people who fell through the cracks not because of poor choices, but because of circumstances beyond their control. But David Hale was different from the anonymous families her foundation helped. She had looked into his eyes as he bled, and that Allie had seen the quiet strength that made him step forward when others would have walked away. There was something about him that challenged her assumptions about heroism and nobility, about what made someone worthy of help. The business card she'd left at the hospital was one small gesture, but Cassandra found herself hoping he would use it, not because she needed to repay a debt, though she did, but because she suspected David Hale might be the kind of person whose life was worth investing in. Back in his apartment, David picked up Cassandra's business card and studied the elegant lettering Cassandra Ward, CEO, Ward Industries. Below it, a phone number and email address embossed in gold. He thought about the investigator's questions about the mounting bills on his kitchen table, about Leo's quiet acceptance of their limitations. Pride was important, but so was providing for his son. Maybe there was a way to accept help without compromising his principles. David set the card down without making a decision, but he didn't throw it away. Sometimes he was learning the right choice wasn't immediately clear. Sometimes you had to sit with uncertainty until the path forward revealed itself. The second hospital bill arrived on a Thursday morning, along with a notice that David's rent was 5 days overdue. He sat at his kitchen table with his coffee-growing-cold calculator in hand, trying to make numbers add up to something that resembled financial stability. No matter how he adjusted the figures, they came up short. Leo was at school blissfully unaware that their small world was teetering on the edge of collapse. David had managed to return to work the previous week, moving more slowly than usual, but determined to show Marcus he could still do the job. The pain in his ribs had faded to a manageable ache, but the medical bills were a wound that wouldn't heal. His phone rang as he was staring at the eviction notice that had arrived with the morning mail. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer anyway. "Mr. Hale, this is Catherine Walsh, Ms. Ward's personal assistant. Ms. Ward would like to schedule a meeting with you if you're available." David's grip tightened on the phone. "About what?" "She has a business proposition she'd like to discuss. Would this afternoon work for you? Say 2 o'clock at her office?" David glanced at the papers spread across his table bills, notices the crushing weight of financial reality. What kind of business proposition? I think it would be better if Ms. Ward explained it herself. Ward Industries, building on 5th Street, 42nd floor. Security will be expecting you. After hanging up, David sat in his quiet apartment and wrestled with his pride. Whatever Cassandra Ward wanted to propose, it was likely another form of charity dressed up as something else. But the eviction notice seemed to mock his principles, reminding him that pride was a luxury he couldn't afford when his son's stability was at stake. The Ward Industries building was everything David had expected, and more glass and steel reaching toward the sky marble lobbies that echoed with the sound of expensive shoes elevators that moved with silent efficiency toward the upper floors where real power lived. The 42nd floor was a study in understated elegance, all clean lines and muted colors that probably cost more per square foot than David made in a year. Catherine Walsh met him at the elevator, a woman in her 50s with the kind of professional competence that ran multinational corporations. "Mr. Hale, so good to meet you. Miss Ward is waiting in her office." Cassandra's office occupied a corner of the building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. She stood as David entered, dressed in a charcoal business suit that somehow managed to be both authoritative and approachable. "David, thank you for coming. Please sit down." The chairs facing her desk were more comfortable than anything in David's apartment leather that probably cost more than his monthly rent. David perched on the edge, acutely aware of the gap between their worlds. "Catherine, could you bring us some coffee?" Cassandra asked, then settled into the chair beside David rather than behind her imposing desk. "How are you feeling? Healing well?" "I'm fine," David said automatically. "Your assistant mentioned a business proposition." Cassandra smiled at his directness. "Right to the point. I like that." She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. "I need to hire someone, David. Someone I can trust completely." "For what?" "Personal security and driver for my son. Ethan is 12, and my current arrangement isn't working out well." Cassandra's voice carried a note of frustration. "The security company I've been using sends different people every few weeks. Ethan doesn't feel comfortable with strangers, and frankly, neither do I." David frowned. "I'm not a trained bodyguard. I clean office buildings. You stepped between me and 2 armed men without hesitation. You took a knife wound to protect someone you'd never met." Cassandra's eyes were steady on his. "That tells me more about your character than any training certificate could." Catherine returned with coffee in cups that probably cost more than David's weekly grocery budget. David accepted his gratefully, using the moment to process what Cassandra was offering. What would the job involve exactly? Driving Ethan to and from school, staying with him during after-school activities, some weekend events. Light security, mostly just being aware of your surroundings, making sure he's safe. Cassandra paused. The salary would be $80,000 a year plus health insurance for you and your son. David nearly choked on his coffee. $80,000 was more than twice what he made at the cleaning company, enough to move them out of their cramped apartment, enough to give Leo opportunities David had only dreamed of providing. That's too much, he said, for driving a kid around. Is it? Cassandra's tone was matter-of-fact. Ethan's safety is worth everything to me, and I need someone who understands what it means to be a father. Someone who will care about my son's well-being as much as his security. David set his coffee cup down carefully. This is charity. Expensive charity. This is business, Cassandra corrected. I have a problem. I need someone I can trust with my son's life. You have skills. I need courage, integrity, experience as a father. It's a fair exchange. David studied her face, looking for signs of pity or condescension, but found only professional honesty. Still, the offer felt too good to be true, the kind of opportunity that didn't come to people like him. Why me? You could hire professionals, people with actual training. Because professionals see a job, you see a child who needs protection. Cassandra's voice softened. Because when you were bleeding in that alley, you asked if I was hurt. Because you refused my money even when you desperately needed it. Because Ethan deserves someone who will care about him as a person, not just as a paycheck. David was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Leo's face when he'd asked about the movie, about the broken action figure still sitting on their kitchen counter, about the eviction notice that made this conversation feel like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. I'd want to meet him first, David said finally. Your son, make sure we get along. Cassandra's smile was radiant. Of course. Would this evening work? You could bring Leo if you'd like. Ethan would enjoy meeting him. As they worked out the details, David felt like he was stepping through a doorway into a completely different life. The practical part of his mind cataloged the benefits: steady income, health insurance, the chance to give Leo stability and opportunities. But another part of him worried about the cost of accepting help, even help disguised as legitimate work. David, Cassandra said as he prepared to leave, I know this feels overwhelming, but you saved my life. Let me help you build a better one for you and your son. David nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. As he rode the elevator down from the 42nd floor, he thought about how quickly life could change, how one moment of courage could open doors he'd never imagined walking through. That evening, as he explained the opportunity to Leo over their simple dinner, David watched his son's eyes widen with excitement and wonder. You mean I might get to meet another kid, one who has really cool toys? Maybe Superman? We'll see how tonight goes. Will I like him? Will he like me? I think you'll get along just fine. Maybe David thought it was time to stop fighting every offered hand and start believing that sometimes good things happen to good people. The job application lay on his kitchen table that night, signed and ready to be submitted. It represented more than employment. It was a bridge between the life they'd been living and the life they might be able to build together. 3 weeks into his new job, David still felt like he was living someone else's life. The sleek black sedan he drove each morning was worth more than he'd made in 2 years at the cleaning company, and the Ward estate where he picked up Ethan each day looked like something from a magazine about how the other half lived. But it was Ethan himself who had made the transition easier than David had expected. At 12, Cassandra's son carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to privilege. But there was something genuine beneath the polished surface, a loneliness that David recognized from his own childhood, the particular isolation that came from having everything except what mattered most. Did you really fight off 2 guys to save my mom? Ethan asked on their 3rd morning together, his backpack properly stowed in the seat beside him as David navigated morning traffic toward his exclusive private school. I helped her out of a bad situation, David said carefully. Sometimes that's what you do when someone needs help. The other drivers never talked to me, Ethan said, looking out the window at the passing city. They just put up the partition and play music I can't hear." David glanced in the rearview mirror at the boy's thoughtful face. "Do you want me to put up the partition?" "No." Ethan's response was immediate. "I like talking. Mom says you have a son my age." "A little younger. Leo's 7. "What's he like?" David found himself describing Leo's curiosity, his resilience, his way of finding joy in simple things. Ethan listened with the attention of someone hungry for stories about normal family life, and David began to understand why Cassandra had been so specific about wanting someone who understood what it meant to be a father. The afternoons were easier than David had expected. Ethan's schedule was packed with activities, tennis lessons, tutoring, music practice, but he approached each one with dutiful compliance rather than enthusiasm. David found himself serving as more than just a driver, becoming a quiet sounding board for a boy who clearly had few adults in his life willing to simply listen. "David," Ethan asked one afternoon as they waited outside his tennis coach's facility, "do you think my mom is lonely?" The question caught David off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "She works all the time. Even when she's home, she's on her phone or her computer. She tries to hide it, but I can tell she's sad sometimes." David chose his words carefully. "Your mom has a lot of responsibilities. Running a big company, taking care of you, that can be isolating. She doesn't date anyone. My friends' parents are always going out or having people over, but Mom just works." Ethan turned in his seat to face David directly. "Do you think she's pretty?" David felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Ethan, that's not really—" "She is, though, right, and she's smart and funny when she's not being all businessy. I don't understand why she's always alone." The conversation stayed with David as he drove Ethan home that evening as he navigated the tree-lined streets of Cassandra's neighborhood, where houses sat behind gates and manicured lawns. He'd been trying not to think about Cassandra as anything other than his employer, but Ethan's questions forced him to acknowledge what he'd been carefully ignoring. Cassandra was beautiful, but more than that, she was fascinating. During their brief interactions, when she gave him Ethan's schedule, when she asked about her son's day, David caught glimpses of the woman behind the CEO facade. She was funny when she let her guard down, asking about David's own day with genuine interest, sharing small frustrations about business meetings and board presentations. "How's the new job working out?" Mrs. Patterson asked that evening as David and Leo shared dinner in their old apartment. They'd been looking at better places, but David was cautious about making too many changes too quickly. "Good," David said. "Really good. Ethan's a nice kid, just lonely, I think." "And his mother?" Mrs. Patterson's tone was carefully neutral, but David caught the undercurrent of curiosity. "She's been very kind to us. Professional." Leo looked up from his homework spread across the kitchen table. "Can I meet Ethan?" "You said he likes building things too." David had mentioned Ethan's interest in constructing complex robots with expensive kits, and Leo had been fascinated by the idea of someone his age with access to such sophisticated toys. "Maybe sometime. We'll see." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Cassandra called David directly the next Friday afternoon, her usual composure slightly frayed. "David, I'm so sorry to ask this, but could you possibly stay late tonight? I have a dinner meeting that's running long, and Ethan's babysitter canceled at the last minute." "Of course," David said. "No problem at all. Would it be terribly inconvenient to bring Leo? I know it's short notice, but I'd feel better knowing Ethan has some company, and I'd love to meet your son properly." An hour later, David found himself walking through the front door of Cassandra's home with Leo beside him, both of them slightly overwhelmed by the scale and elegance of the space. The house was beautiful, but warm, filled with family photos and Ethan's artwork, comfortable furniture that invited relaxation rather than intimidated with its expense. Ethan appeared at the top of the curved staircase, his face lighting up when he saw Leo. "You must be Leo. Want to see my robot collection?" The two boys disappeared upstairs in a chatter of excited conversation, leaving David alone in the foyer feeling slightly out of place. He'd been in the house before, but only briefly, usually waiting in the kitchen while Ethan gathered his things. They seemed to be getting along well. Cassandra's voice came from behind him, and David turned to see her emerging from what looked like a home office, still dressed in her business attire but with her hair slightly mussed and her expression tired. Long day? David asked. Endless. Board meetings, budget reviews, a conference call with our Tokyo office that started at 6 this morning. Cassandra kicked off her heels with obvious relief. I'm sorry to impose on your evening. It's not an imposition. Leo's been wanting to meet Ethan. They moved into the living room, a space that managed to be both elegant and comfortable with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a garden that was probably worth more than David's annual salary. Can I get you something to drink, coffee, wine? Cassandra asked, settling into one of the leather chairs with a sigh. Coffee would be great. As Cassandra prepared their drinks in a kitchen that looked like something from a cooking show, David found himself studying the family photos that covered one wall. Ethan at various ages, some professional portraits, others candid shots that spoke of genuine love and connection. But no father figure David noticed. No wedding photos or couple shots. Ethan's father isn't in the picture, Cassandra said quietly, apparently noticing his observation. He left when Ethan was 2. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility of a family. I'm sorry. That must have been difficult. It was devastating at the time. Now, I think we're better off. Cassandra handed him a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. What about you? Do you ever think about dating again? David nearly choked on his coffee. No, not really. Leo keeps me pretty busy, and honestly, I can't imagine trying to explain our situation to someone new. What situation? Single father working multiple jobs just to keep the lights on. Not exactly what most women are looking for in a partner. Cassandra studied his face with an intensity that made David uncomfortable. You might be surprised. Some women value character over bank accounts. Before David could respond, the sound of laughter erupted from upstairs, followed by Leo's voice calling down excitedly, Dad, you have to see this robot. It can do backflips. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. As David and Leo drove home later that evening, Leo chattering about Ethan's impressive toy collection and the pizza they'd ordered for dinner. David found himself thinking about Cassandra's words and the way she'd looked at him when she'd said them. Back at the Ward house, Cassandra stood at her bedroom window watching the taillights of David's modest car disappear down her driveway. Ethan had already written David a thank you note in his careful handwriting talking about when Leo could visit again. For the first time in years, Cassandra's house felt less like a showcase and more like a home, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the comfortable presence of a man who saw her as something more than a business transaction. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew, but also one she wasn't quite ready to give up. David first noticed something was wrong on a Tuesday morning when Ethan seemed unusually quiet during their drive to school. The boy, who had become increasingly talkative over the past month, sat hunched in the back seat staring out the window with an expression that reminded David uncomfortably of his own son's face during the worst days after Sarah's death. Everything okay back there? David asked, adjusting the rearview mirror to get a better look at Ethan. Mom got some weird phone calls last night, Ethan said quietly. She tried to hide it, but I could hear her voice through the wall. She sounded scared. David's protective instincts sharpened immediately. What kind of phone calls? I don't know, but she kept saying things like, I already told you no, and this conversation is over. Then I heard her crying after she hung up. The revelation sat heavily in David's chest as he dropped Ethan off at school, watching until the boy disappeared safely through the private academy security gates. Cassandra had seemed distracted during their brief interaction that morning, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks that David was beginning to recognize as signs of stress. When David picked up Ethan that afternoon, the boy's teacher pulled him aside with a concerned expression. Ethan seemed quite upset today. Is everything all right at home? David assured her that he'd speak with Cassandra, but his worry deepened. That evening, after dropping Ethan off at the house, David found himself lingering longer than usual, helping with homework and staying for dinner at Cassandra's insistence. She seemed grateful for the company, though she deflected his careful inquiries about her well-being with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to handling problems alone. It wasn't until the following week that David discovered the truth, and it came from an unexpected source. Detective Sarah Martinez. The police officer who had taken David's statement about the alley attack called him on his cell phone during Ethan's tennis lesson. "Mr. Hale, I was wondering if you could come down to the station. There are some things about your case I'd like to discuss with you." David's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong? Did you catch the guys who attacked Miss Ward?" "It's complicated. Could you come in this afternoon, and Mr. Hale, you might want to suggest that Miss Ward come with you." The police station was exactly as depressing as David remembered from his previous visit. All fluorescent lights and worn furniture that had seen too many difficult conversations. Detective Martinez met them in a small conference room, her expression grim as she spread several photographs across the scratched table. "Security footage," she explained, pointing to grainy black and white images that showed the alley where David had been stabbed. "From the building across the street. We just got it processed." Cassandra leaned forward, studying the images with growing confusion. "I don't understand. What are we looking at?" "This was taken about 20 minutes before the attack," Martinez said, indicating a timestamp on one of the photos. "Do you recognize this man?" David watched Cassandra's face drain of color as she stared at the image. It showed a well-dressed man standing at the mouth of the alley, apparently talking on a cell phone while watching the street. "Richard," Cassandra whispered, her voice barely audible. "Richard?" David asked. "My brother." Cassandra's hands were shaking as she picked up the photograph. "But this doesn't make sense. What would he be doing there?" Detective Martinez placed another photo on the table. "This was taken 5 minutes later. Your brother meeting with 2 men who matched the description of your attackers." The room seemed to tilt around David as the implications became clear. The attack hadn't been random. Cassandra's own brother had set her up, had arranged for her to be robbed and possibly worse in that dark alley. Why? Cassandra's voice was hollow, all her usual strength and composure stripped away. Why would Richard do this? "We've been investigating your brother's financial situation," Martinez said gently. "He's accumulated substantial gambling debts with some very dangerous people who don't accept late payments or payment plans." David felt sick. He thought about Ethan's quiet worry about the phone calls that had scared Cassandra, about how close they'd all come to losing her that night in the alley. "How much does he owe?" Cassandra asked, though David could see she already suspected the answer would be devastating. "Close to $2 million to a loan shark operation with ties to organized crime." Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious. "Ms. Ward, I need you to understand something. These people don't just walk away when they can't collect. They escalate." "What does that mean?" David asked, though he feared he already knew. "It means they'll go after family members, especially family members with the resources to pay." Martinez looked directly at Cassandra. "It means you and your son are in danger." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. David's mind raced through everything that had happened since that night in the alley, viewing it all through this new lens of betrayal and ongoing threat. "The phone calls," Cassandra said finally. "They've been calling me demanding that I pay Richard's debts. I thought they were just scammers, people who'd read about the attack in the news and were trying to take advantage." "What exactly did they say?" Martinez asked. "That I owed them money, that if I didn't pay they'd make sure I understood the consequences." Cassandra's voice was steady, but David could see the fear in her eyes. "I told them I wasn't responsible for my brother's debts." "That's not how they see it," Martinez said. "To them, you're Richard's insurance policy, a wealthy sister who can cover his losses." David felt a cold fury building in his chest. "Where is Richard now?" "We're looking for him. He's disappeared, probably hiding from both his creditors and us." Martinez gathered the photographs. "Ms. Ward, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you willing to cooperate with our investigation? Help us build a case against these people?" "Of course," Cassandra said immediately. "Whatever you need." "It means wearing a wire when they call recording conversations. It could be dangerous." David spoke before he could stop himself. "No, absolutely not. You're not putting her in more danger." Both women looked at him with surprise, and David realized he'd revealed more about his feelings than he'd intended. But he couldn't bring himself to care about maintaining professional boundaries when Cassandra's safety was at stake. "David's right," Cassandra said quietly. "I have Ethan to think about. I can't risk leaving him without a mother." As they left the police station, David's mind was already shifting into protective mode. The military training he'd never mentioned to Cassandra dormant for years began reasserting itself as he mentally cataloged security vulnerabilities and potential threats. "I should resign," he said as they reached their cars. "This changes everything. I can't protect Ethan if I'm not aware of the full situation." "No." Cassandra's response was immediate and fierce. "David, you're the only person I trust completely. If anything, I need you more now than ever. These aren't random muggers, Cassandra. These are professional criminals who are willing to hurt family members to collect debts. This is way beyond what you hired me for." Cassandra stepped closer, her hand touching his arm. "You saved my life once already. That night in the alley, if you hadn't been there—" She couldn't finish the sentence. David looked into her eyes and saw not just fear, but trust, complete, unwavering trust in his ability to protect her and Ethan. It was a responsibility that terrified and humbled him in equal measure. "We need to increase security," he said finally. "Professional security, not just me. Whatever you think is best." As David drove home that evening, his mind raced with plans and contingencies. He would need to research the criminal organization they were dealing with, understand their methods and capabilities. He would need to coordinate with Cassandra's existing security team, probably overhaul their entire approach. Most importantly, he would need to keep Ethan and Leo safe while they navigated this dangerous new reality. The thought of either boy being hurt because of adult mistakes and betrayals made David's jaw clench with determination. That night, as he tucked Leo into bed, David made a silent promise. Whatever happened, whatever these people were planning, he wouldn't let them hurt the family he'd grown to love. He'd lost Sarah to circumstances beyond his control, but he wouldn't lose anyone else. Not on his watch. The threatening letter arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped under Cassandra's office door, sometime between the night security shift and her arrival at 7 a.m. Catherine found at first her usual composure cracking as she read the typed message with hands that trembled slightly. "Miss Ward?" she said, her voice carefully controlled as Cassandra emerged from the elevator. "There's something you need to see." The letter was brief and to the point. "Your brother's debt is now your debt. $2.2 million including interest. You have 72 hours to make arrangements or we start collecting in other ways. We know where your son goes to school." Cassandra read it twice, her face growing paler with each word. The mention of Ethan sent ice through her veins, transforming abstract fear into something immediate and visceral. "Call David," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "Tell him to pick up Ethan immediately and bring him here, then cancel all my meetings for the rest of the day." David arrived within 20 minutes, Ethan beside him, looking confused, but not yet frightened. Cassandra's relief at seeing them both safe was so profound it nearly brought her to her knees. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, picking up on the tension in the room despite the adult's attempts to appear calm. "We need to have a family meeting," Cassandra said, guiding them into her private conference room. "There are some things you need to know." David listened as Cassandra explained the situation to Ethan in terms a 12-year-old could understand. Uncle Richard had made some bad choices. Some dangerous people were angry about money, and they needed to be extra careful for a while. Ethan's questions were thoughtful and mature, revealing a resilience that reminded David of his own son's ability to adapt to difficult circumstances. "So, we're like witnesses in those movies?" Ethan asked. "The ones who have to be protected." "Something like that," David said. "But this isn't a movie, buddy. This is real, which means we all need to take it seriously." After Ethan was settled in the outer office with Catherine working on homework under the watchful eye of building security, David and Cassandra retreated to her private office to plan their next steps. "I need to tell you something," David said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Something I should have mentioned before, but it never seemed relevant." Cassandra looked up from the legal pad where she'd been making notes. "What? I wasn't always a construction worker. Before I met Sarah, I was in the military. Special Forces. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. The revelation hung in the air between them, recontextualizing everything Cassandra thought she knew about David's capabilities. Suddenly, his calm competence in the alley made more sense, as did his immediate shift into protective mode when the threats had escalated. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, though her tone held curiosity rather than accusation. "Because it was a different life, a different person." David's jaw tightened. "I got out because I wanted something normal, something peaceful, a family, a regular job, a life that didn't involve weapons and tactical planning. But you remember how to do those things. You don't forget training like that. It's like riding a bicycle, except the bicycle is designed to neutralize threats and protect high-value targets." Cassandra felt a complex mix of relief and apprehension. Relief that David's protection came with professional expertise. Apprehension about what that might mean for the violence that could be heading their way. "What do we do?" she asked. David pulled out his phone and showed her a list he'd been compiling. "First, we need to get both boys somewhere safe, somewhere these people can't reach them. Then we need to coordinate with Detective Martinez and find out exactly what we're dealing with." "Safe? How safe where?" "I have a friend from my unit. Retired now, runs a private security company. He has a secure facility outside the city designed for exactly this kind of situation." David's voice took on the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to operational planning. "The boys can stay there with professional protection while we deal with this. I can't send Ethan away. He's already been through enough disruption in his life. Cassandra, they threatened him specifically. These aren't people who make idle threats." David's use of her first name, the dropping of formal boundaries, felt significant in a way that had nothing to do with their current crisis. Cassandra realized that somewhere in the past weeks their relationship had shifted from professional to personal, and the threat they faced was crystallizing feelings she'd been trying to ignore. "What about us?" she asked. "If the boys are safe, what happens to us?" "We become the bait," David said simply. "We make ourselves visible, draw their attention away from Ethan and Leo while the police build their case." "That sounds incredibly dangerous." "It is. But it's the only way to end this permanently. If we just hide, they'll wait us out. These people are patient when it serves their interests." As they refined their plans over the next several hours, Cassandra found herself studying David with new appreciation. The mild-mannered janitor who had saved her life was revealing layers of competence and strategic thinking that both impressed and attracted her. His transformation from employee to protector to tactical partner felt natural despite its speed. "David," she said, as afternoon shadows lengthened across her office, "I need you to know something. Whatever happens, whatever risks we're taking, I'm grateful. Not just for the protection, but for everything. You've given Ethan something he's never had before, a father figure who puts his well-being first." David's response was interrupted by Catherine's voice over the intercom. "Miss Ward, Detective Martinez is here to see you." The detective brought news that was both encouraging and alarming. The police had identified the criminal organization behind Richard's deaths, a sophisticated operation with connections to money laundering and human trafficking. They were dangerous, but they were also under federal investigation, which meant resources were available to protect Cassandra and build a comprehensive case. "The good news is that we can probably roll up the entire operation if we do this right," Martinez explained. "The bad news is that they're more dangerous than we initially thought. These aren't just loan sharks, they're part of a larger criminal enterprise." "What do you need from us?" David asked, his military bearing evident in his posture and tone. Martinez studied him with new interest. "You have operational experience, Special Forces 3 deployments. That changes things. With your background, we might be able to set up something more sophisticated than just wearing a wire." Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed them surveillance photos. "We've identified their primary meeting location, but we need someone inside to get actionable intelligence." David and Cassandra exchanged glances. "Inside? How?" Cassandra asked. "You go to the meeting they're demanding. David goes with you as security. We wire you both, have backup positioned, and try to get them on record discussing their entire operation." "Absolutely not," David said immediately. "Too many variables, too much that could go wrong." It's the fastest way to end this, Martinez countered, and with your tactical background, the risk assessment changes significantly. That evening, as they finalized arrangements to move Ethan and Leo to David's friend's secure facility, Cassandra found herself alone with David in her home office. The boys were upstairs packing their voices, carrying down the hallway as Ethan explained his robot collection to a fascinated Leo. "Are we crazy to consider this?" Cassandra asked, looking at the tactical plans David had sketched out on her whiteboard. "Probably," David said, but his smile took the sting out of the admission. "But crazy might be our best option." Cassandra moved closer, studying the diagrams and contingencies he'd mapped out with military precision. "I keep thinking about that night in the alley. How you didn't hesitate to help a stranger. This is different. This isn't a stranger." The simple statement carried weight that had nothing to do with employer-employee relationships. Cassandra turned to face him suddenly, very aware of how close they were standing, how the crisis had stripped away all the careful professional boundaries they'd maintained. "David," she said softly, "whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that you've changed our lives, both Ethan's and mine. We were just existing before going through the motions. You made us feel like a family again." David's response was to cup her face in his hands, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Cassandra." The kiss that followed was inevitable, born of shared danger and growing trust of the recognition that some connections transcend circumstances and social boundaries. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, the air between them charged with possibility and promise. "After this is over," David said, his forehead resting against hers, "we need to talk about what this means." "After this is over," Cassandra agreed, "we're going to have all the time in the world to figure it out." Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, unaware that in a mansion overlooking the harbor, two people were preparing to risk everything to protect the family they'd unexpectedly found in each other. The dog tags David had kept hidden beneath his shirt for years now lay visible against his chest, a reminder of the soldier he'd been and the protector he'd chosen to become again. But even as they held each other in the quiet of Cassandra's office, both knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The criminal organization behind Richard's deaths wouldn't be satisfied with threats and phone calls much longer. Soon, they would demand a face-to-face meeting, and when that happened, David and Cassandra would have to walk into the lion's den with nothing but their wits awire and the hope that love might be worth the ultimate gamble. The attack came at dawn. 3 black SUVs moved up the winding drive toward the Ward estate with coordinated precision that spoke of military planning. David spotted them from his position at the security station where he'd been monitoring perimeter cameras since 4 a.m. running on coffee and adrenaline. "Contact," he said into his radio, his voice calm despite the spike of tension in his chest. 3 vehicles approaching from the main gate. All units to defensive positions. Cassandra's security team, augmented by David's friend Marcus Williams and 2 other former Special Forces operators, moved with practiced efficiency. They'd spent the previous day fortifying the house, establishing fields of fire, and running through contingency plans that David hoped they wouldn't need. "Where are you?" Cassandra's voice came through his earpiece, tight with controlled fear. "Safe room like we planned," David replied, checking his weapon one final time. "Stay there until I give the all-clear no matter what you hear." David had insisted on wearing his military dog tags openly now, not for sentiment, but for identification in case everything went wrong. His transformation from protective driver to tactical operator was complete years of civilian life stripped away to reveal the soldier beneath. The first SUV stopped 50 yards from the house, and David counted 8 men emerging with the fluid movements of professionals. These weren't street thugs or desperate amateurs, they were trained operatives, which made the situation both more dangerous and more predictable. "They're going to try to flank us," David murmured into his radio, watching the attackers spread into formation. "Williams, take your team around back. I'll hold the front approach with Rodriguez and Chen." David's military call sign had been Ghost earned through 3 tours of making the impossible seem routine. Now, moving through Cassandra's house with practiced silence, he felt the familiar calm that came with combat operations. This was what he'd been trained for, what his body remembered even after years of peaceful civilian life. The first shots came through the front windows, precise but not immediately dangerous, a probe to test their defenses and draw return fire. David held his position waiting for the attackers to reveal their true strategy. "Movement on the east side," Williams reported. "4 tangos trying to breach the patio doors." "Negative," David replied, studying the tactical display on his tablet. "Let them think they're succeeding. We want them inside where we can control the engagement." The house's security system had been upgraded beyond civilian standards with reinforced safe rooms, ballistic glass, and defensive positions David had personally selected. The attackers were walking into a carefully prepared trap. "David." Cassandra's voice was steady despite the circumstances. "There's something you need to know. Richard is with them. I can see him on the north camera." David's jaw tightened as he switched to the correct monitor. Cassandra's brother stood beside one of the SUVs talking animatedly with a man in an expensive suit who was clearly in charge. The betrayal was complete. Richard wasn't just a debtor anymore. He was actively participating in threatening his own sister and nephew. "Copy that." David said, his voice carefully neutral. "Stay in the safe room." The tactical situation developed exactly as David had predicted. The attackers split their forces with the main group, creating a distraction at the front, while a smaller team attempted to breach the rear of the house. David coordinated his defense with the calm precision of someone who'd done this many times before, under much worse conditions. "Contact rear," Williams reported as the sound of the breaking glass echoed through the house. 3 tangos in the kitchen. Engaging." David moved through the house like water, using furniture and architectural features as cover while he maneuvered toward the kitchen. The attackers were good, but they were fighting on ground David had prepared in a house he'd studied until he knew every angle and approach. The first intruder rounded the corner into David's field of fire and went down with the quick efficiency of a professional engagement. The second tried to retreat but found Williams waiting in the hallway behind him. The third surrendered when faced with crossfire from 2 directions. "Kitchen secure," David reported. 2 down, 1 in custody. The front assault was more aggressive but equally unsuccessful. David's security team had prepared overlapping fields of fire that turned the elegant foyer into a killing field for anyone trying to force entry. The attackers' advantage in numbers meant nothing when they were forced into a bottleneck. "David." Rodriguez's voice carried excitement. "The suit guy is calling for retreat. They're pulling back to the vehicles." David moved to a window position where he could observe the withdrawal. The operation had lasted less than 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. His body hummed with the familiar combination of exhaustion and hyper-alertness that followed combat. Richard was still visible beside the lead SUV, and David could see him arguing with the man in the suit. Even at this distance, David could read the body language. Richard was scared desperate, probably realizing that his plan to use his sister's wealth to solve his problems had backfired catastrophically. "Williams, can you get a clean shot on the vehicles?" David asked. "Negative. Too much risk of civilian casualties if they return fire toward the house." David made a quick tactical decision. "All units hold position. Let them go. We have what we need." As the SUVs disappeared down the drive, David felt the familiar post-combat clarity that came with successful operations. They'd protected the house, captured intelligence, and sent a clear message about the cost of threatening Cassandra and Ethan. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The criminal organization behind Richard's debts wouldn't give up after one failed assault. They'd regroup, change tactics, probably escalate the level of violence they were willing to employ. David keyed his radio one final time. "All clear. Threat neutralized. Beginning damage assessment and prisoner processing." Only then did he allow himself to think about Cassandra, waiting in the safe room, trusting him to keep her alive. The dog tags around his neck caught the morning light streaming through the bullet-marked windows, a reminder of the promises he'd made and the responsibilities he'd accepted. The standoff lasted another hour, with David coordinating between Detective Martinez's tactical team and his own security personnel, while Cassandra remained in the safe room. The captured attacker had provided valuable intelligence under questioning, revealing the location of the criminal organization's headquarters and confirming that Richard had been actively feeding them information about Cassandra's security arrangements. "They're planning something bigger," Martinez reported over the secure radio. "This was just a probe. The real assault comes tonight at the downtown office building." David studied the tactical map spread across Cassandra's dining room table, his mind automatically calculating angles of attack and defensive positions. "They want to draw us out of a fortified position into something they can control. It's a trap." Williams added, his scarred face grim with understanding. "They're counting on us taking the bait. Then we spring the trap first." David said, his finger tracing routes on the building schematics Martinez had provided. "But we do it our way with our timing." The plan that emerged was classic military doctrine. Use the enemy's expectations against them while maintaining tactical superiority through better intelligence and positioning. David would accompany Cassandra to the demanded meeting, but they'd arrive early with full surveillance and backup positioned, band-aid, throughout the building. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the estate, David found himself checking and rechecking equipment with the methodical precision of someone preparing for a mission that couldn't afford mistakes. The simple wedding ring set he'd purchased that morning sat in his tactical vest pocket, a promise he intended to make if they both survived the next few hours. "You don't have to do this," Cassandra said, emerging from the safe room to find David adjusting his body armor in her hallway mirror. "We could just disappear, take the boys, and leave the country." "Running doesn't solve anything," David replied, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "These people won't stop until they're stopped. And Richard..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your brother made choices that put you and Ethan in danger. That's not something I can let stand." Cassandra moved closer, her hands helping him adjust the straps of his vest with surprising familiarity. "You've done this before. Many times. Different circumstances, different stakes." David turned to face her directly. "I've never had so much to lose before." The admission hung between them, carrying weight that transcended their current danger. David reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to risk. "This probably isn't the right time," he said, "but I'm not sure there's ever going to be a perfect moment for people like us." Cassandra's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal two simple gold bands, elegant in their understated perfection. "Cassandra, I know we haven't known each other long. I know our circumstances are complicated. But I also know that what I feel for you and Ethan isn't something that comes along twice in a lifetime." David's voice was steady, carrying the same calm certainty he brought to tactical planning. "Marry me, Cassandra. Let me be the family you and Ethan deserve." Cassandra's answer was interrupted by the sharp crack of gunfire from outside, followed immediately by William's voice over the radio. "Contact Richard Ward approaching the house under a white flag. He's alone, but I've got movement in the tree line." David cursed silently, his proposal moment shattered by the reality of their situation. But Cassandra's hand on his arm stopped him from moving toward his weapon. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to everything. To the proposal to the family, to whatever comes after we get through this." David's kiss was fierce and brief, a promise sealed under impossible circumstances. Then he was moving toward the door, his weapon ready, his mind shifting back into combat mode even as his heart carried the warmth of Cassandra's acceptance. Richard stood 50 yards from the front door, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face showing the strain of weeks spent running from consequences. David could see the desperation in Cassandra's brother's posture, the particular kind of fear that came from owing money to people who collected debts with violence. "Cassandra," Richard called out, his voice cracking slightly. "I need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes and then this all ends." David's tactical assessment was immediate and grim. Richard was wired for sound probably being monitored remotely. The movement Williams had spotted in the trees was almost certainly snipers positioned to take out David and Cassandra if the conversation didn't go according to plan. "He's bait," David murmured into his radio. "Classic assassination setup. Williams, can you confirm sniper positions?" "2 confirmed, probably more. This is not a negotiation, it's an execution." David made his decision with the cold calculation of someone trained to assess impossible situations. "Cassandra, stay inside. This ends now." He moved through the front door with deliberate calm, his weapon visible, but not immediately threatening. Richard's relief at seeing him was genuine, suggesting that Cassandra's brother still believed he could manipulate his way out of the situation he'd created. "David, thank God. Tell Cassandra I can fix this. I just need—" The sniper's bullet took Richard in the chest before he could finish the sentence, spinning him around and dropping him to the manicured lawn. David was moving before Richard hit the ground, zigzagging toward the tree line while calling for backup and medical assistance. The firefight that followed was brief but intense. David's military training reasserted itself completely. Years of civilian softness burned away by the immediate need to neutralize threats and protect the woman he loved. Williams and his team moved with professional efficiency, turning the attacker's ambush into a rout that left 3 dead and 2 captured. David took a bullet in his left shoulder during the final phase of the assault, the impact spinning him around but not dropping him. The pain was familiar, manageable secondary to the need to ensure that all threats were eliminated. "Clear," Williams called out as police sirens wailed in the distance. "All tangos down or in custody." David holstered his weapon and moved carefully toward where Richard lay, bleeding but alive on the lawn. Cassandra's brother looked up at him with eyes that held pain, fear, and something that might have been gratitude. "She'll be safe now," Richard whispered, blood flecking his lips. "She'll be safe," David confirmed, pressing his jacket against Richard's wound while they waited for paramedics. "But you're going to have to live with what you did to her." As Detective Martinez supervised the crime scene and David received medical attention for his shoulder wound, Cassandra emerged from the house to survey the aftermath of her brother's betrayal. The estate that had been her sanctuary was now marked by violence, but David could see in her face that she understood the necessity of what had happened. "Is it over?" she asked, taking David's uninjured hand. "It's over," David confirmed, thinking of the simple wedding rings in his vest pocket, a promise of the new beginning. They could finally plan together. The captured attackers had provided enough intelligence for the FBI to roll up the entire criminal organization within 48 hours. Richard survived his wounds but faced federal charges for conspiracy and racketeering. The loan sharks who had threatened Cassandra found themselves facing decades in federal prison, their operation dismantled and their leadership scattered. But for David and Cassandra, the real victory wasn't in the destruction of their enemies, it was in the family they'd built from courage and love, tested by fire and proven unbreakable. As they stood together in the aftermath of violence, both wounded but alive, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The boys were safe at the secure facility, Leo and Ethan probably playing video games and comparing action figures, blissfully unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything. Soon, David thought they'd be able to bring them home to a world where the greatest danger was scraped knees and homework assignments. "So," Cassandra said softly, her fingers intertwined with his as paramedics worked on his shoulder about that proposal. David smiled despite the pain and exhaustion. "I think I remember something about saying yes to everything. Everything," she confirmed, and in that single word lay the promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream, a second chance at love at family, at the kind of happiness that came not from avoiding danger, but from facing it together and emerging stronger on the other side. The wedding rings waited in his vest pocket, no longer a desperate gamble, but a certain promise. They had stepped into the fire and walked out together, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. 1 year later, David Hale Ward stood in the kitchen of their new home watching through the window as Ethan and Leo raced across the backyard with the carefree energy of brothers who had forgotten they hadn't always been family. The house was smaller than Cassandra's estate, larger than David's old apartment, a perfect compromise that reflected their blended life. "Coffee's ready," Cassandra said, wrapping her arms around David's waist from behind. The simple gold band on her finger caught the morning light still new enough to make David smile whenever he noticed it. "They're going to wear themselves out before school," David observed, accepting the mug she offered. "Leo's convinced he can teach Ethan to climb the oak tree." Ethan needs to learn that not everything requires a strategic plan. Cassandra laughed. Your son's teaching him to be spontaneous. Our son, David corrected gently, a distinction that had become natural over the months since their quiet wedding. Both our sons. The ceremony had been simple, held in the garden behind their new house with just Mrs. Patterson, Detective Martinez, and David's friend Williams as witnesses. Ethan had served as ring-bearer with solemn pride while Leo had provided commentary throughout the vows that made everyone laugh despite the tears. David's new role as head of security for Ward Industries had proven to be more than just a professional position. It was a partnership that leveraged his military expertise and Cassandra's business acumen. Together, they developed security protocols that other companies were beginning to adopt, turning David's protective instincts into a growing consulting business. The community center dedication is next month, Cassandra said, settling beside David at their kitchen table. The mayor wants us both there for the ribbon cutting. David nodded, still amazed by how naturally Cassandra had embraced his vision for helping other single fathers navigate the challenges he'd faced. The Hale Ward Community Center would offer job training, childcare, and support services for families struggling to build stability in an uncertain economy. Mrs. Rodriguez called yesterday, Cassandra continued. 3 more fathers have enrolled in the job placement program, including one who heard about us from his night shift supervisor at Meridian. The irony wasn't lost on David that his old workplace had become a recruiting ground for families who needed the same kind of help he'd once been too proud to accept. Marcus Chen, his former supervisor, had become an unofficial ambassador for their programs identifying men who were working multiple jobs to support their children. Any word from Richard? David asked. His lawyer says he's doing well in minimum security. The counseling program is helping with his gambling addiction. Cassandra's voice carried complicated emotions, forgiveness mixed with caution, love tempered by the memory of betrayal. He wants to write a letter to Ethan. David considered this carefully. Richard's cooperation with federal investigators had resulted in a lighter sentence, and his genuine remorse seemed authentic. But Ethan's well-being remained David's primary concern. What does Ethan think? He's curious about his uncle, but not eager to rebuild a relationship. He says he has all the family he needs now. Through the window, David watched Ethan help Leo reach a higher branch, both boys working together with the easy cooperation that had developed naturally between them. Ethan had blossomed under David's steady presence, his academic performance improving along with his confidence. Leo, meanwhile, had gained the older brother he'd never known. He wanted someone who shared his love of building things but had the resources to turn imagination into reality. David, Cassandra said softly, do you ever think about that night, about what would have happened if you just kept walking? David turned the question over in his mind as he had many times during quiet moments over the past year. I think about it, but not with regret. Even knowing everything that followed, the danger, the violence, the complications, especially knowing everything that followed. David reached for her hand thumb, tracing the wedding ring that symbolized promises made and kept. That night, I was walking home to an empty apartment, worried about bills I couldn't pay, wondering how I was going to give Leo the life he deserved. And now, he gestured around their warm kitchen toward the sounds of their boys playing outside. Now, I wake up every morning next to the woman I love in a house filled with laughter with 2 sons who are growing up to be good men. Now, I have work that matters, a family that's stronger together than any of us were apart. Cassandra leaned against his shoulder, both of them watching their boys play in the security of a backyard where the biggest danger was grass stains and scraped knees. The foundation wants to fund similar programs in other cities, she said. Detroit, Phoenix, maybe Atlanta. They're calling it the Hale Initiative. David felt a familiar mix of pride and humility. His name attached to programs that helped struggling fathers felt both natural and surreal recognition for simply doing what needed to be done. Speaking of initiatives, Cassandra said with a smile that David had learned to recognize as dangerous. I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Martinez yesterday. Dr. Martinez, David's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Our family doctor, the one who's been monitoring your health since we started talking about expanding our family. Well, Ethan and Leo keep asking about little sisters, and Dr. Martinez thinks I'm in excellent health for having another baby. The possibility hung between them like a gift neither had dared to hope for. David had assumed their blended family was complete, that the happiness they'd found was already more than he'd had any right to expect. Are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the best things in life come when you're not looking for them, when you're just trying to do the right thing and trust that everything else will work out. As if summoned by their conversation, Ethan and Leo burst through the back door, grass-stained and breathless, talking over each other about tree-climbing techniques and plans for a treehouse that would require David's construction expertise. "Dad," Leo said, using the title that still made David's heart swell, "Ethan thinks we need a rope ladder, but I think regular stairs would be safer." "Dad," Ethan added his adoption of the name as natural as breathing, "we could build it big enough for a little sister to use when she's older." David and Cassandra exchanged glances over the boys' heads, surprised by their intuitive understanding of possibilities that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. "We'll see," David said, pulling both boys into a hug that smelled of sunshine and childhood adventures. "First, you two need showers and breakfast, or you'll be late for school." As the boys raced upstairs arguing about who got the bathroom first, David found himself thinking about the broken action figure that had once sat on his kitchen counter, representing everything he couldn't provide for his son. Now their home was filled with toys and books and the comfortable chaos of a family that had grown organically from love and commitment rather than obligation. "Do you ever regret that night?" Cassandra asked again, her hand finding his across the table. David looked around their kitchen, listened to the sound of his son's laughter echoing from upstairs, felt the weight of Cassandra's wedding ring against his palm, and smiled. "Never," he said simply. "It brought me to my real life." The morning routine that followed was a symphony of organized chaos, Leo insisting he could make his own lunch while creating a spectacular mess. Ethan meticulously packing his backpack according to some complex system. Only he understood. Cassandra fielding phone calls about board meetings while simultaneously braiding Leo's hair for picture day, and David coordinating it all with the calm efficiency of a man who'd learned that true strength came not from military precision, but from adapting to the beautiful unpredictability of family life. "Mrs. Patterson's coming for dinner tonight," David announced as he loaded the boys into the car. "She wants to hear all about your science project, Leo." "Is she bringing her famous cookies?" Leo asked hopefully. "Would she come without them?" Cassandra replied, sliding into the passenger seat. "She's also bringing some photos from her granddaughter's wedding. Apparently, she wants our opinion on flower arrangements." "Why would she want our opinion on flowers?" Ethan asked. David caught Cassandra's eye in the rearview mirror, both of them thinking the same thing. Mrs. Patterson had been dropping increasingly obvious hints about future grandchildren, and her sudden interest in wedding planning was hardly subtle. "Because she loves us," David said simply, "and sometimes people who love you want to be involved in your happiness even when it means offering advice you didn't ask for." The drive to Ethan's school was filled with comfortable chatter about homework and weekend plans. The private academy that had once felt like a fortress of privilege now seemed like just another part of their extended community. The teachers knew David by name. The security guards waved as they drove through the gates, and Ethan's friends had long since stopped being impressed by his mother's wealth. They were more interested in the fact that his stepdad could build amazing tree houses and knew how to throw a perfect spiral. "See you tonight, buddy," David said as Ethan gathered his things. "Try not to learn everything in one day, save some for the rest of us." "Very funny, Dad." But Ethan was grinning as he climbed out of the car, his confidence a far cry from the lonely boy David had first met. Leo's elementary school was a different world, public, diverse, bustling with the energy of children whose parents came from every walk of life. David had initially worried about the transition from their old neighborhood, but Leo had adapted with the resilience that seemed to be his superpower. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, no relation to David's former supervisor, met them at the classroom door with a warm smile. "Leo's been telling everyone about the treehouse project," she said. "I think you've inspired half the class to become architects." And the other half to become ninjas, apparently," David replied, watching Leo demonstrate some elaborate climbing technique to a group of fascinated classmates. "He's a special kid," Ms. Rodriguez observed. "You should be proud." David was proud, but it was a complicated pride that encompassed not just Leo's achievements, but the journey that had brought them here. Every milestone, Leo's first A+ in math, his successful presentation about Jupiter's moons, his election as class representative, felt like a victory, not just for Leo, but for every single father struggling to be enough. "I am," David said simply, "every single day." The drive toward Industries took them through the heart of the city past the alley where everything had changed. They never spoke about it during these daily commutes, but David always slowed slightly as they passed, remembering the rain and the fear and the split-second decision that had altered the trajectory of multiple lives. "Penny, for your thoughts," Cassandra said as they pulled into the executive parking garage. "Just thinking about how many small moments add up to big changes," David replied. "If I'd taken a different route home that night, if you'd decided to drive instead of walk, if those guys had picked a different victim, if Richard had been a better man," Cassandra added quietly, "if I'd paid more attention to his problems instead of just throwing money at them. You can't blame yourself for his choices." I don't nod anymore, but I do think about the randomness of it all. How many people walk past someone who needs help every day? How many opportunities for connection do we miss because we're too busy, or too scared, or too convinced that it's not our problem? David parked the car and turned to face her fully. Is that what the foundation is really about? Making sure fewer people walk past? Maybe. Or maybe it's about making sure that when someone does stop to help, they don't have to choose between being a hero and taking care of their own family. The Ward Industries building buzzed with the energy of a company that had found its soul. Cassandra's leadership had always been competent, but now it carried a sense of purpose that went beyond profit margins. The security protocols David had implemented weren't just about protecting assets, they were about creating an environment where people felt safe to be their best selves. "Morning meeting in 10, Catherine Walsh announced as they stepped off the elevator. "The Detroit expansion proposal is on the agenda." "Any pushback from the board?" David asked. "Some concerns about return on investment," Catherine replied. "But Senator Morrison's endorsement yesterday helped. Having a former single father in Congress advocate for the program carries weight." David still marveled at the reach their story had achieved. The attempted kidnapping and subsequent investigation had made national news, but it was the human interest angle, the janitor who became a hero, the billionaire who found love, the community center that was changing lives that had captured public imagination. Mr. Hale, the voice belonged to Jennifer Chen Marcus's daughter, now working as an intern in the security department while finishing her criminal justice degree. "There's someone here to see you. Says he heard about the job placement program on the radio." David found the man waiting in the lobby, mid-30s work clothes, the particular kind of exhaustion that came from trying to hold everything together with insufficient resources. He reminded David so much of himself a year ago that the recognition was almost physical. "Mr. Hale, I'm Tony Valdez. I work nights at the hospital cleaning crew. I heard about your program on Cairo yesterday morning. Please call me David. What can I do for you? I got 2 kids, 7 and 9. Been on my own since their mom passed 3 years ago." Tony's voice was steady, but David could hear the underlying strain. "The radio said you help guys like us find better work, maybe some support with childcare during the transition." "That's exactly what we do," David said, settling into a chair beside Tony rather than behind his desk. "Tell me about your situation." The conversation that followed was achingly familiar. Medical bills, stretched budgets, the constant juggling act between being present as a father and earning enough to survive. But there was also something new hope. Tony wasn't just asking for help. He was asking for opportunity for a chance to build something better. "The program is 12 weeks, David explained. "Job training in the mornings, life skills workshops in the afternoons. We provide childcare during program hours, and our placement rate is 92%. What kind of jobs? Depends on your interests and aptitude. We have partnerships with construction companies, tech firms, healthcare systems, city departments. The goal isn't just employment, it's sustainable career growth." Tony was quiet for a moment, processing. "What's the catch?" David smiled. He'd asked the same question when Cassandra first offered him the security job. "No catch, just commitment. The program is intense, and the men who succeed are the ones who show up every day ready to work. And if I mess up, if the kids get sick and I miss days, then we figure it out together. The whole point is that you don't have to do this alone anymore." As Tony filled out preliminary paperwork, David thought about the dozens of similar conversations he'd had over the past year. Each man's story was unique, but the underlying struggle was universal, the exhausting effort to be enough for children who deserved everything. "David," Cassandra appeared in the doorway. "The Detroit team is ready for the conference call." The expansion meeting went better than expected. The Detroit Community Center would be their largest project yet, serving a population that had been hit hard by economic changes. Local officials were enthusiastic, funding was secured, and the timeline looked realistic. 6 months to launch, Cassandra announced as the call ended. "Think we can do it?" "I think we don't have a choice," David replied. "Too many families need this for us to take our time." The rest of the morning flew by in a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and the 100 small decisions that kept a growing organization moving forward. David found himself constantly amazed by how naturally he'd adapted to this world of boardrooms and budgets. The skills that had made him a good soldier, attention to detail, ability to see the big picture, talent for inspiring others, translated surprisingly well to civilian leadership. "Lunch," Cassandra suggested as the morning meetings wrapped up. They drove to the small cafe near Leo's school, a tradition they'd started to ensure they saw each other during busy days. The owner, Maria Santos, greeted them with the warmth reserved for regular customers who had become friends. "The usual?" she asked. "Actually," Cassandra said with a meaningful look at David, "I think I'll try something different today. What do you recommend for someone who might be eating for two?" Maria's eyes widened, then broke into a huge grin. "Felicidades. When are you due?" "We're not. We're hoping." Cassandra laughed. "We're just starting to think about it seriously." "Ah, the planning stage. Very important." Maria nodded sagely. "My grandmother always said that babies come when families are ready to love them, not when the calendar says it's convenient." As they ate their lunch, David and Cassandra talked through the practical considerations, timing, space, the boys' reactions, how to balance a new baby with their growing professional responsibilities. But underneath the logistics was a deeper conversation about what kind of family they wanted to be. "Leo asked me yesterday if we were rich now," David said. "I wasn't sure how to answer." "What did you tell him?" "That we were comfortable, but more importantly we were grateful. That having enough meant we could help other people who were struggling." "Good answer. I worry sometimes that Ethan doesn't understand how different his life is from most kids." "He's starting to. The community center has been good for that, seeing the families we serve understanding why the work matters." Cassandra reached across the table and took his hand. "I love watching you with those men. The way you listen to their stories, how you never make them feel like charity cases. Because they're not. They're just people who need a chance. Like you needed a chance, like we all need chances," David corrected. "You gave me an opportunity, but I had to prove I deserved it. That's what we're offering, opportunity, not handouts." The afternoon brought its own rhythm tours for potential donors, interviews with local media about the Detroit expansion, a video call with the mayor's office about zoning permits. David marveled at how comfortable he'd become in front of cameras, how naturally he could articulate their mission to skeptical politicians and wealthy philanthropists. "You're good at this," Cassandra observed after a particularly successful pitch to a foundation board. "Better than I am sometimes." "Different approach, same goal," David said. "You speak their language about return on investment and measurable outcomes. I tell them stories about real people. Both matter." "Both matter," David agreed. The school pickup routine was the highlight of David's day first. Ethan, full of news about his debate team victory, then Leo, practically vibrating with excitement about his successful volcano demonstration. The car ride home was a symphony of childhood energy, both boys talking over each other about their plans for the treehouse, their ideas for the science fair, their opinions about everything from lunch menu options to professional soccer standings. "Dad, can we work on the treehouse tonight?" Leo asked as they pulled into their driveway. "After homework," David replied automatically, "and after we visit with Mrs. Patterson." "Is she really bringing cookies?" Ethan asked hopefully. "She's Mrs. Patterson. Of course she's bringing cookies." Mrs. Patterson arrived precisely at 6, bearing not just cookies, but also a casserole that could feed a small army fresh flowers from her garden, and a manila envelope full of wedding photos that she spread across the kitchen table with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. "Now, I'm not saying you two need to start thinking about renewing your vows," she began without preamble, "but when you do, these flower arrangements are simply divine." "Mrs. Patterson," Cassandra said gently, "we've only been married for 6 months." "Exactly. Time flies, and when the babies start coming, you'll want everything settled." David nearly choked on his coffee. "Babies. Oh, don't look at me like that. I've seen how you two look at each other, how good you are with these boys. It's only natural to want to expand the family." Leo looked up from his homework with interest. "Are we getting a baby?" "We're thinking about it," Cassandra said carefully. "Cool. Can we name it Thunder if it's a boy?" "Thunder." David raised an eyebrow. "Like Captain Thunder, the action figure you fixed for me." The conversation spiraled into increasingly elaborate plans for hypothetical siblings' potential names ranging from the superheroic to the ridiculous, and detailed explanations of how a treehouse could be modified to accommodate various family configurations. Mrs. Patterson listened with the satisfied expression of someone whose matchmaking instincts had been vindicated. "You know," she said as the evening wound down, "I've been thinking about that night when everything changed. Not the scary parts, but what came after. How one moment of doing the right thing led to all this." She gestured around the kitchen, taking in the homework spread across the table, the boys arguing good-naturedly about bedtime routines, David and Cassandra moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who belonged together. "It wasn't just one moment," David said thoughtfully. "It was 1,000 small choices after that. Choosing to trust each other, choosing to build something together, choosing to believe that we deserved happiness. And choosing to share that happiness," Cassandra added. "The foundation, the community center, none of that would have mattered if we'd just kept everything for ourselves." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's the secret, you know. Real happiness isn't about what you get, it's about what you give." After Mrs. Patterson left, the family settled into their evening routine. Homework was finished, baths were taken, stories were read, and 2 boys who had once lived in separate worlds fell asleep under the same roof, their voices carrying across the hallway as they planned tomorrow's adventures. David and Cassandra stood in their bedroom doorway, watching the peaceful scene, both thinking about the changes another child would bring to this carefully constructed harmony. "Second thoughts," Cassandra asked softly. "About having a baby?" "No." "About whether we can love another child as much as we love these 2? "Definitely." "You know that's not how love works, right? It doesn't divide, it multiplies." David wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them still watching their sleeping sons. "I know. It's just, we've been so lucky. Sometimes I worry about pushing that luck too far." "Or maybe," Cassandra said, leaning back against him, "we've learned that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and we're pretty well prepared for whatever comes next." The next morning brought news that would test that preparation. David's phone rang at Dawn Detective Martinez with an update about Richard. "He's being released next week," she said without preamble. "Good behavior overcrowding the usual reasons. His parole officer wants to know if you have any concerns about him contacting the family." David looked at Cassandra, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand. "What does his release mean for us?" "Probably nothing," Martinez said. "He's genuinely remorseful by all accounts, but I wanted you to know." After hanging up, David and Cassandra sat in their kitchen as dawn broke outside, discussing how to handle Richard's return to the world. Ethan had a right to know about his uncle's release, but he also had a right to continue feeling safe in his own home. "We tell him," Cassandra decided. "We tell both boys age appropriately. And we let them know that they're safe, that we're prepared, that nothing has to change unless they want it to. And if Richard wants to see Ethan, then we take it slow, supervised visits, if at all. Trust has to be rebuilt, not assumed." The conversation with the boys went better than expected. Ethan listened thoughtfully as they explained that Uncle Richard had served his time and would be free to rebuild his life, but that any contact would be entirely up to Ethan. "Do I have to see him?" Ethan asked. "Not unless you want to," David said firmly. "This is your choice, and whatever you decide is okay with us." "What if I want to see him but then change my mind?" "Then you change your mind," Cassandra said. "People are allowed to change their minds about forgiveness. There's no timeline for healing." Leo, who had been listening with the intense concentration he brought to adult conversations he knew mattered, raised his hand as if he were in school. "Yes, Superman. If Uncle Richard is sorry, and if Ethan forgives him, does that mean he can come to our treehouse?" The question was so innocently logical that David had to fight back a smile. "That would be up to Ethan to decide, but maybe we start with much smaller steps than treehouse visits." The Richard situation resolved itself with surprising simplicity. A week after his release, a letter arrived, not for Ethan, but for David and Cassandra. Richard's handwriting was shakier than before, but his words were clear. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. I destroyed your trust and nearly destroyed your lives. I'm writing to tell you that I'm entering a long-term residential treatment program in Oregon. I won't be seeking contact with Ethan until I've proved to myself and to you that I've become someone worthy of being in his life. Thank you for keeping him safe when I couldn't." "Well," Cassandra said after reading the letter aloud to David, "that's more mature than I expected." "People can change," David said. "Maybe not quickly, maybe not completely, but they can change." "Is that what happened to us? They changed?" David considered the question seriously. "I think we became who we were meant to be. The circumstances just gave us permission to stop being afraid of our own potential." Spring arrived with the kind of Pacific Northwest beauty that made residents forget about the long winter. The treehouse project was finally complete, a marvel of engineering that incorporated Leo's practical staircase design and Ethan's elaborate pulley system for hauling supplies. It had become the neighborhood gathering spot, with children from surrounding houses regularly appearing at their gate, asking if they could play in the castle. The community center was thriving beyond their most optimistic projections. 87 men had graduated from the program, with placement rates holding steady above 90%. The Detroit expansion was on schedule, and inquiries from other cities arrived weekly. "I got a call from the White House yesterday," Cassandra announced over breakfast one morning. Both boys looked up with interest. "The president?" Leo asked, impressed. "The president's domestic policy advisor. They want to discuss federal funding for community centers based on our model." "That's incredible," David said. "How do you feel about potentially going national?" "Terrified and excited in equal measure. What about you?" David thought about Tony Valdez, who had just started his new job as a facilities coordinator for Seattle Children's Hospital. About Marcus Chen, who visited the center weekly to help other men navigate career transitions. About the dozens of fathers who had found not just jobs but hope through their program. "I think we have to try," he said. "But we do it carefully. The moment this becomes about politics instead of people, we lose what makes it work." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the mail, including a thick envelope from a publisher in New York. Cassandra had been approached about writing a book about their story, about second chances and the power of choosing courage over comfort. "Any thoughts?" she asked, showing David the contract. "Only if we do it together," he said, "and only if the proceeds go to fund more centers." "I was hoping you'd say that." That afternoon, as David worked in their garden while Cassandra handled phone calls about the federal funding proposal, he reflected on the strange turns life could take. Year and a half ago, he'd been a night janitor, worried about making rent. Now, he was considering writing a book that might be read by millions of people. But the most remarkable change wasn't in his circumstances, it was in his understanding of what constituted a successful life. He'd once measured success by his ability to provide material security for Leo. Now he measured it by the family's capacity to contribute to something larger than themselves. Dad. Leo's voice carried across the yard from the treehouse. Come to see what we built. David climbed the elaborate staircase to find both boys working on what appeared to be a scale model of the community center, complete with tiny offices and a miniature playground. It's for when we have a baby sister, Ethan explained. We want to show her what you and Mom do. What makes you so sure it'll be a sister? David asked. Because Leo and I asked for one, Ethan said with the matter-of-fact confidence of a 12-year-old who believed in the power of positive thinking. Did you, now? We figured you guys could use some help with the girl stuff, Leo added helpfully. We know about boy stuff, but girls are different. David was still laughing when Cassandra appeared at the base of the tree. What's so funny up there? Our sons have decided to put in a request for a baby sister, David called down. Good timing, she called back. I just got off the phone with Dr. Martinez. She wants to see me tomorrow afternoon. The news hit David like a physical force. They'd been trying for 2 months, but somehow he hadn't quite believed it would actually happen. And I think we should find out together. The doctor's appointment the next day was a study in contained excitement. Dr. Martinez, a warm woman in her 50s who had delivered half the babies in their neighborhood, greeted them with a knowing smile. So, shall we find out if you're going to need a bigger treehouse? The ultrasound confirmed what they'd both suspected. Cassandra was 8 weeks pregnant, due in late November. As they stared at this grainy image on the screen, David felt the same overwhelming protectiveness he'd experienced the first time he'd held Leo, the same fierce determination to be worthy of this trust. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Martinez said, strong heartbeat developing right on schedule. They decided to wait until the second trimester to tell the boys, but keeping the secret proved impossible. Ethan noticed that his mother was avoiding coffee. Leo observed that she was taking naps in the afternoon, and both boys confronted them with the kind of logical deduction that would have made Sherlock Holmes proud. So, Ethan said over dinner one evening, when are you going to tell us about the baby? David and Cassandra exchanged glances. What baby? Cassandra asked innocently. The one that's making you tired all the time and grossed out by bacon, Leo said matter-of-factly. Mrs. Patterson told us about morning sickness. Mrs. Patterson needs to mind her own business, David muttered, but he was smiling. So it's true? Ethan asked. It's true, Cassandra confirmed. You're going to have a little brother or sister in November. The celebration that followed was exactly what David should have expected from two boys who had never been allowed to get truly excited about anything before joining their family. Leo immediately began planning elaborate safety modifications for the treehouse, while Ethan started researching the optimal sleeping arrangements for newborns. We should probably call Mrs. Patterson, Ethan said seriously. She's going to want to know about the baby gear we'll need. She probably already knows, David said. I swear that woman has supernatural powers. The pregnancy announcement led to a series of celebrations and planning sessions that reminded David how much their family had grown beyond the four of them. Mrs. Patterson arrived with baby clothes that she claimed to have been saving just in case. Marcus Chen offered to build a custom crib. Detective Martinez volunteered to help with security considerations for the hospital stay, but it was Mrs. Rodriguez, Leo's teacher, who provided the most touching response. She approached David at school pickup with tears in her eyes. I just wanted you to know, she said, how wonderful it is to see Leo so excited about being a big brother. Some children his age would be worried about losing attention, but he's already talking about all the things he wants to teach the baby. He's a special kid, David said. He is. But more than that, he's a child who feels completely secure in being loved. That's not something you see every day. The summer passed in a blur of preparation and growth. The community center hosted its first annual graduation ceremony with 89 men receiving certificates and job placements. The Detroit Center broke ground in July with Senator Morrison and Mayor Coleman both speaking at the ceremony. Cassandra's book proposal was accepted by 3 publishers, leading to a bidding war that resulted in a 7-figure advance, all of which was immediately donated to fund additional centers. But for David, the most meaningful moment came during a quiet evening in August. He was reading in their bedroom while Cassandra napped, her growing belly visible beneath the light blanket, when Leo appeared in the doorway. "Dad, can I ask you something? Always Superman." Leo climbed onto the bed and settled next to David with the serious expression he wore for important conversations. "Do you think Mom loved Ethan's real dad as much as she loves you?" The question caught David off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because I was thinking about my real mom and how much I loved her, and I was wondering if it's okay to love you just as much or if that means I'm forgetting her." David set down his book and pulled Leo closer. "Leo, love isn't like money. You don't run out of it by spending it. Loving me doesn't mean you love your mom any less. It just means your heart got bigger. So it's okay that I don't think about her sad all the time anymore. It's more than okay. It's what she would have wanted. Your mom loved you enough to want you to be happy even if she couldn't be here to see it." Leo was quiet for a moment, processing. "Do you think she knows about Cassandra and Ethan and the baby? I think she knows you're loved and safe and growing up to be an amazing person. I think that's all any parent really wants." "Good," Leo said, settling more comfortably against David's side. "'Cause I really like our family the way it is now." "Me too, Superman. Me too." The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, just weeks before Cassandra's due date. David was at the community center interviewing potential participants for the next program cycle when his phone rang with an unknown Seattle number. "Mr. Hale, this is Dr. Patricia Williams at Seattle Children's Hospital. I'm calling about Richard Ward." David's blood ran cold. "What about him?" "He's been in an accident. Hit by a drunk driver yesterday evening. He's stable, but he's been asking for his sister. The problem is, we don't have current contact information for any family members." David found himself in the unexpected position of being Richard's emergency contact by default. "How bad is it?" "Serious, but not life-threatening. Broken ribs, concussion, some internal bleeding that we've got under control. But Mr. Hale, there's something else. When the paramedics found him, he was carrying a letter addressed to his nephew. He's been very insistent that we make sure it gets delivered." David promised to call Cassandra and visit the hospital that afternoon. The conversation with his wife was delicate. She was so close to her due date that stress could trigger early labor, but she also had a right to know about her brother's condition. "I want to see him," she said immediately. "Cassandra, you're 37 weeks pregnant. The stress. David, he's my brother. Whatever he's done, whatever mistakes he's made, he's still family." They drove to the hospital together, leaving both boys with Mrs. Patterson and strict instructions about what to do if Cassandra went into labor. Richard looked smaller in the hospital bed, older and more fragile than David remembered. The months in treatment had changed him. There was something cleaner about his appearance, more focused in his eyes. "Cassandra," he said when he saw them, his voice rough from the breathing tube. "You came." "Of course I came." Cassandra settled carefully into the bedside chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, literally." Richard managed a weak smile. "But better than I have in years, if that makes sense." "The letter," David said. "The nurse mentioned you wanted Ethan to have something." Richard nodded toward the bedside table. "It's a birthday card. I know his birthday isn't for 2 months, but I wanted him to have it in case I don't get another chance." David opened the envelope and read the card silently before handing it to Cassandra. It was simple, a commercial birthday card with a handwritten note. "Ethan, I know I haven't been the uncle you deserved. I know I hurt you and your mom and put you in danger because of my own problems. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm working every day to become someone you could be proud to know. I'm clean now, and I'm staying clean. If you ever want to meet for ice cream or a baseball game, I'll be ready. If you don't, I understand that too. Love, Uncle Richard." "He's been writing those for months," Richard said quietly. "Birthday cards. Christmas cards, graduation cards. The counselors say it helps to think about the future you want to have, even if you can't have it yet. Richard. Cassandra said, her voice thick with emotion. What happened to you? How did things get so bad? A lot of reasons, none of them good enough. Richard shifted painfully in the bed. But I think the real answer is that I never learned how to ask for help. I thought admitting I had problems made me weak, so I kept pretending everything was fine until it all fell apart. And now I go to meetings every day. I have a sponsor. I work in the kitchen at the treatment center and help new guys figure out the basics. It's not much, but it's honest work. David found himself studying Richard with new interest. The desperation was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine peace. What do you want from us? Nothing, Richard said immediately. I mean, I'd love to be part of Ethan's life someday if he wants that, but I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm grateful for keeping him safe, for giving him a good family, for not letting my mistakes destroy his childhood. He's a good kid, David said. Strong, smart, funny. You'd be proud of him. I already am. The fact that he's turning out so well despite having me for an uncle says everything about the kind of parents you and Cassandra are. They talked for another hour about Richard's treatment, about his plans for the future, about the simple mechanics of staying sober one day at a time. When visiting hours ended, Cassandra hugged her brother carefully, mindful of his injuries. We'll bring Ethan to see you when you're feeling better, she said. If he wants to come. Only if he wants to, Richard agreed. And, Cassandra, congratulations on the baby. David told me you're due soon. 2 weeks if she decides to be punctual. We decided to be surprised, but the boys are convinced it's a girl. Richard smiled, the first completely genuine expression David had seen from him. They're probably right. Kids have good instincts about these things. The drive home was quiet, both David and Cassandra processing the emotional complexity of the visit. Richard's transformation seemed genuine, but forgiveness was a process, not a decision. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. How do we explain this to Ethan? Cassandra asked as they pulled into their driveway. Honestly, we tell him his uncle is in the hospital, that he's been working hard to get better, and that he wrote him a letter. We let Ethan decide what he wants to do with that information. Ethan took the news with the thoughtful maturity that had become his trademark. He read the birthday card twice, asked several clarifying questions about addiction and recovery, and then announced his decision with characteristic directness. I want to see him, he said, but not alone, and not until after the baby comes. I don't want Mom to get stressed and have the baby early because of Uncle Richard. That's very considerate, David said. Are you sure you're ready to see him? I think so. I mean, I'm still mad at him for what he did, but he's trying to get better, right? And people should get chances to prove they've changed. Some people, Cassandra said carefully. People who are genuinely working to change, but you get to decide how much chance to give someone, and you can change your mind if they don't live up to their promises. I know. Mrs. Patterson explained about second chances versus 10th chances. David made a mental note to have a conversation with Mrs. Patterson about appropriate topics for discussions with 12-year-olds, but he had to admit her wisdom was usually sound. The baby decided to make her appearance on October 30th, 3 days before Halloween, and exactly when Leo had predicted. David was at the community center when Cassandra called, her voice tight with concentration. It's time, she said simply. The next 12 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Mrs. Patterson arrived to take charge of the boys, who were simultaneously excited and nervous about becoming big brothers. David found himself ping-ponging between the community center, where he needed to handle a crisis with the Detroit expansion, and the hospital where Cassandra was progressing through labor with characteristic determination. Go handle the work stuff, she told him during a brief lull between contractions. I'm not going anywhere for a while, and Catherine says the Detroit mayor is threatening to pull funding if someone doesn't talk to him personally. I'm not leaving you to have our baby alone. You're not leaving me alone. I have an entire medical team. And David, if you don't fix the Detroit situation, we might not have jobs to come back to after maternity leave. The crisis turned out to be a misunderstanding about zoning permits easily resolved once David was able to speak directly with the mayor's office. But the conference call ran long, and by the time he made it back to the hospital, things were moving quickly. "She's coming now," the nurse announced as David rushed into the delivery room still wearing his suit from the business meetings. Sophia Catherine Hale Ward entered the world at 11:47 p.m. on October 30th, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces, and announcing her arrival with a cry that could be heard down the hallway. David's first sight of his daughter. Their daughter was overwhelming in ways he hadn't expected. "She's perfect," Cassandra whispered, exhausted but radiant as the nurse placed Sophia on her chest. "She looks like you," David said, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "She looks like herself," Cassandra corrected. "Strong and determined and ready to take on the world." The boys arrived the next morning with Mrs. Patterson both carrying handmade welcome signs and elaborate theories about what their new sister would need to learn first. Leo was particularly excited about teaching her to climb trees, while Ethan had prepared a detailed presentation about robot construction techniques. "She's so small," Leo observed, peering into the hospital bassinet with wonder. "You were that small once," David reminded him. "Really? How did you keep me from breaking?" "Very carefully, and with a lot of help from people who loved us." "Are we going to need help with Sophia?" "Probably, but that's okay. Families help each other." The transition home was easier than David had expected, partly because of their extended support network, and partly because Sophia turned out to be an unusually calm baby. She slept well, ate enthusiastically, and seemed content to observe the chaos of their household with the patient expression of someone who knew she was exactly where she belonged. "She's sizing up the situation," Ethan observed during one of his careful studies of his new sister. "Figuring out how our family works before she decides how to fit in." "Smart girl," David said. "Takes after her mother." The community center's first annual holiday celebration took place in early December, with Sophia making her public debut at 8 weeks old. The event had grown from David's modest vision of a small graduation ceremony into a full community festival, with local businesses donating food, families bringing their children, and graduates from previous programs returning to mentor current participants. "Look what you built," Cassandra said, adjusting Sophia's blanket as they surveyed the crowded community center. Families filled every corner of the space, fathers and children playing games, mothers comparing notes about childcare resources, teenagers helping with setup and cleanup. "We built," David corrected. "All of us." Tony Valdez approached them carrying his youngest daughter, a 4-year-old who had become fast friends with Leo during family events. "Mr. Hale, I wanted to introduce you to my supervisor at the hospital. She's interested in partnering with you guys for a healthcare worker training program." The conversation that followed led to another expansion idea, another opportunity to help families build stable futures. David found himself energized by the possibilities, even as he marveled at how far they'd all come. "Remember when this was just an idea?" Cassandra asked as they drove home that evening, both boys chattering in the back seat about the day's activities while Sophia slept peacefully in her car seat. "I remember when I thought my biggest problem was paying rent," David replied. "Now I'm worried about federal funding proposals and book deadlines and whether we're expanding too fast to maintain quality." Good problems to have. The best problems to have. Christmas morning found their house filled with the joyful chaos of a family that had learned to celebrate abundance in all its forms. Sophia slept through most of the present opening waking, only to eat and observe the proceedings with the serious attention she brought to all new experiences. "She's taking notes," Leo announced, "getting ready for next year when she can actually play with stuff." "What do you think she's thinking?" Ethan asked, studying his sister's alert expression. "Probably wondering why everyone is so excited about tearing up perfectly good paper," David said, cleaning up the wrapping paper debris. "Or maybe she's thinking about how lucky she is to be born into this family," Cassandra suggested. "We're the lucky ones," David said, settling onto the couch with Sophia while the boys played with their new construction sets. "All of us." The afternoon brought visits from Mrs. Patterson Marcus Chen and his family Detective Martinez with her teenage daughter and a dozen other people who had become part of their extended family. David found himself thinking about the different kinds of wealth as he watched their living room fill with laughter and conversation. A year and a half ago, he'd measured his worth by his ability to provide basic necessities for Leo. Now he understood that true wealth lay in the network of relationships they'd built, the community they'd created, the sense of purpose that got them up each morning. "Any regrets?" Cassandra asked that evening as they settled into bed, Sophia sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside them. "About what?" "All of it. The chaos, the responsibility, the public attention. Sometimes I wonder if we've bitten off more than we can chew." David considered the question seriously. The past year had been intense, building the foundation, managing rapid growth, navigating the complexities of blended family life, adjusting to life in the public eye. There had been challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. "I regret that it took a crisis to bring us together," he said finally. "I regret that Richard had to nearly destroy himself before finding his way back. I regret that there are thousands of families out there struggling the way we used to struggle, and we can't help them all fast enough. But I don't regret a single choice we've made since that night in the alley. Every risk we took, every leap of faith, every moment we chose to trust each other, it all led to this." He gestured around their bedroom, taking in the sleeping baby, the sounds of the boys talking quietly in their rooms, the sense of peace that had settled over their house like a warm blanket. "This is more than I ever dreamed possible," he continued. "Not just the success of the foundation or the security we can provide for our kids, but the feeling that our lives matter, that we're part of something bigger than ourselves." Cassandra reached for his hand in the darkness. "I love you, David Hale Ward." "I love you too, Cassandra. All of you. This whole beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect family we've built." Outside their window, the city hummed with its usual late-night energy, thousands of people going about their lives making choices that would ripple forward in ways they couldn't imagine. Somewhere in those streets, another single father was walking home from work, worried about bills and wondering how to give his children the life they deserved. Somewhere, someone was making the decision to step forward when others would walk away, to choose courage over comfort, to believe that individual actions could create collective change. David Hale had learned that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about showing up day after day for the people who counted on you. It was about building something better from whatever materials life provided. It was about believing that sometimes the right choice led to rewards you never dared to dream of. The family photo on their refrigerator captured all 5 of them together, David and Cassandra flanking their 3 children, everyone laughing at something Leo had said during the shoot. It was a perfect image of an imperfect family that had found its way to happiness through courage, commitment, and the simple recognition that some things were worth fighting for. As David drifted off to sleep beside the woman he loved with their children, safe under the same roof, and plans for tomorrow already taking shape in his mind, he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of a man who had discovered that sometimes the best things in life really did come to those brave enough to step forward when it mattered most. The broken action figure that had once represented everything he couldn't provide for his son now sat in a place of honor on Leo's bookshelf, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded them all that broken things could be fixed, that families could be rebuilt, and that love was always worth the risk.